Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest edition of Grenzebach Gleer and Associates Thought Leadership Webinar Series. Today, we're joined by about 125 advancement professionals from all over the US and countries around the world. So it seems like our topic, campaigning in challenging times, a blueprint for success, is a popular one. Welcome, everybody. We're pleased that you're here. At GGNA, we know there are some essential elements to campaign success: strong institutional reputation, clear and compelling campaign priorities, staff and volunteers committed to fundraising. But in our 60 years of consulting, there has rarely been a campaign that didn't have to face challenges beyond the control of institutional leaders and fundraisers. The key to campaign success is how the institution meets those challenges. This is our focus for today's conversation with the head of school and director of advancement at the Kincaid School, a co-ed independent day school in Houston, Texas, of more than 1,450 students. In October of 2021, Kincaid's Board of Trustees approved a $125 million working goal for a comprehensive campaign comprising capital, endowment, and annual giving priorities. Although the campaign is still in the leadership gifts, or what we used to call silent phase, the school was forced to go public with its fundraising this past fall because construction was about to start. Today, less than 16 months after the board approving that goal of 125, the school's donors have committed more than $105 million. 3 donors have committed lead gifts of $10 million. But the path to this point has not been simple or easy, so our guests have a lot of wisdom to share. For our conversation, I'm joined today by Jonathan Eads, who became Kincaid's head of school in July 2020. Just think for a moment about what the world was going through in July of 2020. An independent school educator and administrator for nearly 3 decades, Jonathan spent 13 years as head of school at St. Mary's Hall in San Antonio, Texas, prior to assuming the leadership of Kincaid. Tom Moore has been Kincaid's director of advancement for more than 2 decades, since 2001. Think about what happened in the fall of 2001. While at Kincaid, he's overseen 4 previous campaigns and partnered with 4 different heads of school. Tom leads a staff of 12 who are responsible for all facets of engagement and fundraising. There are 4 frontline fundraisers on the team, but I will note that not one of them is purely a major gift officer. They all have other responsibilities as well. As for me, my name is Liz Farr. I'm Senior Vice President with Grenzebach Gleer and Associates, GGNA, and I lead the firm's independent schools practice. Prior to joining GGNA, I had a 27-year career in schools, and I've been honored to serve as GGNA's lead consultant to Kincaid since April 2019. Before we get to the discussion, a quick announcement. Although Tom, Jonathan, and I have prepared some topics and questions, if time permits, we're also open to answering some from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom menu. And please accept our apologies if we don't get to any or all of those questions. So now on to the discussion. So Tom, first question is for you. You've been at Kincaid for nearly 22 years. Tell us a little bit about the fundraising program and culture at Kincaid before Jonathan arrived in July of 2020. How was the school's fundraising? What were the murmurings about a future campaign? And did the school choose Jonathan specifically with the campaign in mind, or how did that weigh into the decisions that the school made in terms of its head of school search? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Liz. My pleasure to be on the call today. Welcome, everybody. We've had a very supportive environment for fundraising for a long time. We had a $47 million campaign that I was able to help complete at that time. It was about 2/3 of the way done back around 2003. And my predecessor did a great job. There's only one gift officer, that was me. And after that, we did a number of campaigns and some small initiatives, if you will, that were around $10 million. And I knew about, in 2010, the school bought some land next door, and we talked about doing build a new upper school. The upper school was built back in the late 50s. It was originally built to house both the middle school and the upper school kids. And it has far outlived its purpose and had been for a long time. And so literally for about 12 years, the talk was, when's the new upper school going to come? When's it going to come? Well, finally, about 4 years ago, the board really got down to it and started looking at what programming ought to be put into it and what the ultimate size of the school should be when we built the upper school. A lot of great planning went into play. And so right before Jonathan came, you could see that it was going to come. It was on track to get going. And yes, indeed, a key consideration to hire Jonathan was to make sure we had a head of school who had prior campaign experience in a big way, not just a small campaign, but in a big way.
Great. And Tom, tell us a little bit about, as the school knew that it would be engaging in a coming campaign, and again, even before Jonathan arrived, how had the board, the previous head of school, the advancement team prepared for the transition to Jonathan's leadership and the campaign generally before Jonathan actually took office?
Right. There were several key things that were done. One was there was a lot of conversations with the faculty about what kind of programming ought to be put in place. What can we strengthen? What can we bring that's new to improve the education of our students? And then there was a lot of discussion for over about a year and a half about, if we build something, how big should it be? There's a point where a school can be too big to maintain its quality, its culture, et cetera. The board had a very active discussion about it. And one of the things that we did was we hired a very strong, we appointed a very strong building committee chair who began working with the faculty and working with our project manager for construction and get things started. And the other thing that we did is, I knew that this was going to be a very big project. The dollar amount was going to be a lot more than we've ever raised before. And it was apparent we needed more staff. And so to help provide information to the board, we hired GG&A to come in and do a development audit to look over the staff, see if what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what can we do better, what can we add, and then how can we be prepared for a campaign. And that's about the point where Jonathan came in, right around that time when that report came back. We saw we needed more staff, and then he came in and off we went.
Great. So Tom's given us a little bit of perspective on the history. And now Jonathan's going to tell you what it felt like to walk into the front door of Kincaid amid a pandemic, the racial tensions of the summer of 2020. Note, George Floyd is a native of Houston. That fall, a contentious presidential election, also lots of, decisions about masking or not masking with parents and faculty. And are we going to be in school in the way we are accustomed to? So Jonathan, you had some significant challenges in those first few months, getting to know your constituents generally, and specifically the best prospects, determining campaign priorities, creating trust in your leadership, educating and developing buy-in for the faculty among Kincaid's key stakeholders. I'm sure the list goes on. How did you specifically, but also the board, the advancement team, how did you start to get your arms around this and solve for all that was going on and where you wanted to go in pretty short order?
Sure, Liz, thank you. Yes, it couldn't have been more extraordinary circumstances, excuse me, that I landed in July 1 of 2020. Before I address that, I do just want to share that I was attracted to, applied to, and then ultimately accepted the position of head of school at Kincaid because of this campaign. I was really excited when I was looking at Kincaid and that opportunity to be only the sixth head of school in the history of Kincaid. That campaign, I was very energized by it, all the different aspects of it, but particularly the challenge of it and the potential legacy of such a campaign, as y'all both noted very quickly. In fact, I think it was my second Board of Trustees meeting here. Our board approved a working goal of 125 million, as has been noted. And as Tom said, the previous largest campaign in the history of Kincaid was 47. So that's an exponential jump, really ambitious, really, really bold. But I was excited by that. So there's kind of stating the obvious first is having a head of school who is not shy to ask, to be an asker, but also for me, I had to quickly had the opportunity to fall in love with Kincaid, because you got to be able to sell the place, and not only the campaign but what the potential impact will be. And that was not an easy thing to do in July of 2020. As you noted, that was the height of COVID. When I got here, only essential personnel were allowed on campus. My first meeting with all the employees, Kincaid has roughly, just rounding up, 1,500 students and rounding up about 500 employees. My first all staff meeting was on Zoom with almost 500 little tiles of a little Brady Bunch style of trying to meet people. Really, really challenging to state the least. But then also not having any chips in the bank as the new leader on such divisive topics of vaccination, masking, and other really difficult things, and people petitioning me. And it was extraordinary and not distinctive to Kincaid or even to the education space. But then, as you mentioned, social justice and reckoning, and even looking at our own difficult times in this regard in the history of the Kincaid School, and going through listening sessions and some really difficult but important conversations as the new guy, but not being able to do it in person, doing all that on Zoom. And then, as I think was also noted, just the fall of 2020, the presidential election was coming up. So to answer your question, we were very strategic about how we went about this, and I have a great board that I've partnered with, and Tom is a gem and a pro's pro. But the first thing that we did, the first 18 months that I was here, our board partnered with me, and what we did, and I'll say it quickly, but it was over 18 months, we reaffirmed our foundational documents. Who are we? That was the first thing we said. With such volatility, divisiveness, and if we're going to go out and ask for money, people got to have a little bit of insight into who is the new guy, what's he about, is the direction of the school changing, and on all these divisive topics, where's Kincaid? Who are they? And so what we did, our board formally re-examined and modified and updated our mission statement. That's foundational document number 1. Our core values of Kincaid, we affirmed they did not change, but the wording and definitions of them were updated. Our diversity commitment hadn't been touched in 2005 and was very dated, and certainly did not reflect our emerging world. And so through a very collaborative process, board and I partnered with faculty, admin, alumni, parent community to update the diversity commitment, created a document we call strategic drivers, essentially what our guiding principles of what we will be about and what we will not be about. And then finally created an expression policy of principles of civil discourse, knowing the election was coming up. So that was one of the first most important things that we did, because before you can go engage major donors, they're going to want to know, is the direction of the school changing with the volatility of the world? Who are you? The first main thing that I did, and Tom was instrumental in helping me, was relationship building, when relationship building was dang near impossible. It had to start first online, but Tom was great about connecting me with current and past trustees. We conducted a feasibility study with y'all, with GG&A, and y'all were tremendous partners. That took place prior to my arrival. And you specifically, Liz, were great with our board. I was in board meetings where you were helpful to going to our board saying, this is a hefty lift, to state the obvious, but if it can be done, and we think it can, it's going to take stretching by all major constituencies, but particularly our board. And so as we engage in that, that was the most important first constituency in terms of our campaign. I met with all of current and past trustees and longtime major friends of the school. Most of that was on Zoom, unfortunately. Some were here on campus outside, socially distanced, doing what we had to do. But our board in that silent phase that we wrapped up this past fall, just under 50% of our almost $106 million raised has come from that group. And so that was the first most important thing. But finding other ways to connect in a time where you couldn't be in person. I use a lot of video. You can quickly tell I love to talk. I enjoy being around people. And since I couldn't be around people, I was shooting video. A lot of it I was shooting myself. I had my wife shooting me, my sons, wherever I could in the backyard. But one of the first hires I made at Kincaid was hiring a director of strategic communication and really building out a team. We actually didn't have that sort of staff, believe it or not, here at Kincaid. So things like video, once we got back on campus here at Kincaid, even things like standing out at carpool, as simple as that is, but finding ways to let people know who I am, just even see who the new guy is. Tom and I came up with a notion called tent talks. Now you've heard of TED Talks. Kincaid built, like a lot of schools and businesses, we built 7 temporary indoor-outdoor structures. They were essentially open-air tents. And we used these for all sorts of different things, to hold class, to the kids to eat lunch. But it was also a space where I was able to engage different constituencies and begin to present who I am, the vision for Kincaid, and then the case for our campaign. And so that was really, really an important first step, getting back together. And then Tom and I partnered, and with y'all GG&A's support as well, leadership briefings. So with that feasibility study, we'd identified roughly our top 100 prospects that expanded, but our best prospects. And then we did in groupings of anywhere half a dozen to about a dozen online leadership briefings that I led with the different groups of people. And again, it was for most cases, an introduction to me. They didn't know, they knew my name, they'd seen my CV, but all of Tom and my original plans to get to be known, we had to adjust. But the leadership briefings were not solicitations, but really presenting the case, the why of what we were doing here at Kincaid. Anyway, and then even leveraging things like Instagram, as silly and trite as that might sound. If you go to Kincaid_head of school, you'll get a sense of I've actually used that to try to connect at a time that was really hard to connect. I've continued to use it. And then in conclusion, at this point to your question, showing up, that really has been the best thing, because typically, again, I don't want to overstate my role or the role of the head of school, but at a level of 125 million, people aren't going to give it that level if they don't have a degree of confidence in the leadership. And so a big part of that is getting to be known. So now that we've emerged out, well, we're still living with COVID, but emerging out of it, showing up at everything has been something I've tried to do.
Yeah. I will put in a plug for Jonathan's Instagram account, which I follow. And it gives you such a sense of what life on Kincaid's campus is like, and even off of Kincaid's campus sometimes. So Tom, brag a little on Jonathan, or fill in anywhere where he was too modest. Like how did Jonathan step into this environment, and how did you help? But how did the board play a role, other volunteers? How did this become so successful so quickly, particularly Jonathan's transition?
Well, thank you. So let me do a little calendaring here for you. So Jonathan came, as you heard, July 1st, 2020. Within a year, in May of 21, we did those leadership briefings he talked about. Our feasibility study began then. Before that, though, what was really critical, and Jonathan's mentioned this several times, a campaign has to have a very strong why. It has to go beyond buildings. And we spent a lot of time, he did, with people here at school, developing some priorities beyond just buildings. So we looked at some three very major programs that there's no reason to recite all those now, but they're very good add-ons for our students that are really good in programs. So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. Then I had our staff do some research right before he came and after he came to identify the top prospects. We looked at people who've been historical donors to the school and close friends to the school, and made that list for the leadership briefings. And here's how we organized those. We started building a campaign committee with a very small number of people. We got like 4 honorary chairs and 3 chairs. And then we did not build the Kincaid cabinet out for more volunteers, if you will, until we had a chance to get the briefings underway. And we added a few more volunteers, and each one of them hosted a leadership briefing on Zoom. And sometimes there might be 2 of them doing the hosting. They did the invitations. So our response rate to participate was very, very high. And so the briefings were done, and following the briefings is when GG&A did its feasibility study, and they visited a number of the people in person here and did the rest of those on Zoom. And it provided them enough data to give a report in the fall of 2021. I guess it was in August. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there was a recommendation made for we tested a $165 million goal just about. And the feasibility study said, that's a little too ambitious probably. So the GG&A came back with 123, and the board said, no, we're going 125 working goal, which was great. And then that working goal was set in October of 2021. And at that point, we had, as Jonathan mentioned, very strong support from the board, and we got going, and we started going out a little bit broader. It was very important for us to really think, as an advancement team, to think about who are the prominent people he should meet with. Not only those that were donors to the school, large donors, but also those that are ambassadors who could help spread the word about the great work he's doing and that kind of a thing. So we spent a lot of time on that, and he was very, very helpful in this process. I would prepare short bios on these people, and he would ask for more information if he needed it, but he's a quick study. And then it really made it very systematic, very strong, and a very effective way to go. And so right now our campaign cabinet has about 25 volunteers. We broadened things out beyond our major gift prospects, and we have a parent division now, an alumni division. I'm holding back on a grandparent division and parents of alumni division probably until later on this year, maybe around May or June, because there's so many prospects that we have to work with our four staff members on and our volunteers. I want to make sure we keep focused on the important ones now. We can work through them, and then the other ones are important too, but I don't want to have I don't want to dilute it. I want to make sure we can achieve and focus Jonathan's time properly in this. And his time has been fantastic. He spends a great deal of time on it, and he's very, very good in the room, as you can tell.
So that's a perfect segue, Tom. Thank you. Jonathan, tell our listeners today a little bit about what percentage of your time over the past 16 months, since there was a go moment in October of 2021, what percentage of your time has meeting with donors, soliciting donors, doing campaign stuff consumed?
It's ramped up significantly each month, but I would say 60 to 70%. I mean, a significant portion, especially as we're taking our show on the road now and even going to meet with supporters of Kincaid, alumni, et cetera, that are not even in Houston, Texas.
Yeah. Well, and I want to underscore that 60 to 70%, and it won't be there, right, for 5 years, but when it's the most the most capable prospects, you've taken a lot of meetings to have a lot of those conversations, sometimes with a volunteer, sometimes with Tom, sometimes with another administrator. But you're doing yeoman's work in addition to running the school. And that, your commitment's paid off, right? I mean, you've been very successful in this campaign. For those who may be interested, those fundraisers who are counting, Kincaid to date with its leadership prospects has a 72% yield rate to asks. 72%, which in our business is pretty extraordinary, which shows you the level of thought and commitment and real hard work that Tom, Jonathan, and others have put in. So think for a moment about, you had COVID, you had a new head of school, you had a racial reckoning, all these kinds of things. But what are the sort of the kernels of advice that no matter what the challenge is, our listeners could benefit from? Because every campaign faces challenges. But what are the things that you really look to about how Kincaid has prepared for and conducted its campaign thus far that you think have let you continue this progress, maintain momentum in ways that have gotten you to where you are?
Sure. Thanks for asking that. I mean, for starters, we've had some great third-party consultants. GG&A has been a great partner.
Your check's in the mail, Jonathan.
Oh, I appreciate it, but it's true. That allowed us the confidence to move forward, but to move forward in a bold, historic campaign. So that's kind of, campaign 101 is a feasibility study, trying to learn what your community will bear. But it can't be understated. That was and is very critical to our strategy and to our success. I'd highlight the board chair head of school relationship. Again, another obvious thing, but I think it's really important because especially with a significant campaign, there are certain donors, who you have in the room for the ask is key. And there are certain folks, they want the head of school and they want the board chair. Those two people are really, really important. So having a board chair with whatever his or her other professional obligations has the ability and to have that sort of time and then generosity. And so I've had 2 board chairs in my short time at Kincaid, and both have been very generous with their money, but also very generous with their time and have been in the room at the right time, at the right place. And again, just candidly, they've been great about pushing me forward as the leader of the school. So that relationship's important. Secondly, the relationship between the head of school and the director of advancement development, whatever you want to call that individual at your respective school or institution. And again, I have the good fortune, Tom here's almost a quarter of a century now at Kincaid alone, and is a seasoned pro, but he's also not a look at me guy. It's all about team. I can't remember how many emails he sounded off when he shares some good news. I'll say great job, and he's always like team. And so Tom and I meet weekly. Back to that 60 to 70% of my time. I'm that with all the different responsibilities. I would also be remiss not to mention that I've got a strong admin team and a good assistant head of school. So the day-to-day operations are able to continue to function. The communication is really key. It can't be understated. So for us, as I mentioned, we hired a director of strategic communications who's a full-time person on our admin team. So things like our microsite to publish glossy documents on our campaign, to we also hired an outside firm where we came up with our campaign slogan of all in. Because our campaign is literally not building just a new upper school, but literally every single division and department at the school is going to be enhanced either with bricks and mortar or with programs. So we're all in, and because of the scope, it's a double meaning. All in. Our whole community is going to have to, for us to do this, it's going to take all of us to do it. So the communication of the why, Tom mentioned that. I just want to echo that. At other schools or businesses, that's where I've seen the campaigns not be as successful as if people say, do they really need that? You know, a planetarium, that sounds cool, but do you need that? And for us, our upper school was built in 1957. It is, we're holding it together with duct tape and bubble gum. So that why and communicating it well. The staffing that Tom mentioned, so I won't repeat that, but just making sure you're properly staffed from an advancement level. I'll tip my cap to Tom's staff. They have me and other people that are volunteers who are doing the asking so well prepared with these briefings before they go in, not only bios, but the ask amount. And I've been a part of now over 100 notable asks here at the Kincaid School. And only twice have I been surprised. One in a good way and one in a bad way.
That's good odds.
Well, we asked for 250 and got $1 million. Another one got asked for $1 million, got 250. They swing both ways sometimes. All that to say, 2 out of over 100. They're very good about, and there might be some discussion time at the end about Tom's strategy there, but they do a great job setting the asker up for success once you get in the room. And then lastly, I could go on and on, but Liz, last thing, I think this is probably the most important thing, is sometimes it just takes courage. And I don't mean that flippantly, but courageous leadership. And I'm not talking about my own, but the board. There's been so many reasons to delay or defer, and the school has. We put this project off for years. Part of it was leadership changes. Then you had COVID. Then you had social justice, DEI issues. Now the latest reason is inflation. And there's so many reasons to tap the brakes, but our board has finally said, you know what? No, we are going forward. That we keep using the phrase working goal for a reason, because it's going to probably end up being 150 to 175 because of inflation, supply chain issues. But our board has said, you know what? We're planting a flag and we're doing that. So having that strong leadership at the board chair, campaign chair, and then for us, our building committee chair has been paramount to the success we're experiencing.
I have to applaud Kincaid's courage, all of you, you, Jonathan, you, Tom, your board, your volunteers, you have been extremely courageous, not unwisely so, but very courageous. We are at 1:29 Eastern, 12:29 Central, where Tom and Jonathan are. This webinar is scheduled for half an hour, but we still have 181 participants on the call. So if you all are willing to stay for another 10 to 15 minutes, we can take some questions from the audience that are in the question and answer box, and we'll keep talking. And if others need to leave, of course, we will understand. So question for you, Tom, I'm directing it to you. A question in our question and answer box: was the previous campaign also comprehensive? I know the answer, but could you talk, Tom, a little bit about the history of campaigns at Kincaid and how this one is different and what that's meant?
Thank you for the question. All of our previous campaigns were not comprehensive. We didn't include the Kincaid Fund, which is our annual fund. This time we decided, with the scope of this campaign, that it made sense to give the donors a full list of what the philanthropic needs were for the school for the next 5 years. So that includes 5 years of Kincaid Fund, which is our operating annual fund, and 5 years of special events, and then everything else for the campaign. And frankly, it's worked out very, very well. I mean, we have found a lot of people are very happy to know what the full gamut will be. Many people have decided to increase their Kincaid Fund giving over the scope of the campaign. And some people have said, look, I'll make a nice campaign gift now. I'm still going to make an annual fund gift, but I'll decide that every year. Our annual fund has broke a record last year, which was phenomenal. And we're on track to do the same thing again this year. Can I add one point to what John said earlier? It's very important to have your staff properly in place before you start the campaign. And so one of the things that we didn't have before for any previous campaign was an advancement services manager, who was really the person that kind of keeps me in line, keeps us all in line, makes sure we're doing everything we're supposed to do. And since we've added development officers, we need that. And this person makes sure the strategy documents are prepared properly. We think through it carefully. We meet as a team once a week for an hour and go over the strategies and make sure we're in place. And it's something we didn't have before, but the person we hired had already had a lot of familiarity with the school. It was the perfect person for the job. And then also you have to make sure your gift records things are in place. You have all your procedures in place to record. You have to work with the CFO's office to make sure you're processing the gifts properly and recording them great in the right way. And just those little things. The blocking and tackling is important before you go.
So, well, I was going to say that's a great segue to I'm going to combine a couple of questions from the question box, and those are: how many staff did you add before the campaign, and was there any kind of resistance to investing in the team, growing staff before the campaign? Was there, what sold, the question says, what sold your internal stakeholders on the need to add some staff and bolster protocols?
We are very, very fortunate to have a board that understands the value of investing in the advancement function. We've been slowly adding staff. I had a second major gift officer hired several years before the campaign started. I hired the next one who came in almost 2 years ago now. So so the good timing was right. I think it's important to add people, not all at once. It's hard to add 3 people at once. You kind of do it over a period of time so you can get them trained, get them familiar with people. It just works better that way. And so when it came time for the advancement service manager position, the person who had that job before was head of alumni activities. And then she moved over, which was a natural spot for her. The board was very wise, and I'm very grateful that they've included the salary to be part of the campaign for that person for a couple of years, and then move it back in the operating budget. The data that we had from GG&A showing nationally the staffing that needs to be done for a campaign of this size helped a lot too. And our finance committee is very, very thoughtful and understands the value of staff. We're very blessed with that, no question.
So question for Jonathan. There's a lot of talk about a possible coming recession, and we're already seeing layoffs in professional positions in some sectors, finance and tech among them. Of course, oil and other businesses tend to be more important in Houston. But are you doing any planning to manage existing expectations about your campaign in light of the economy?
It's certainly first front of brain for us as we're going through this campaign. There's no way it can't be. I mean, for us, it's a 5-year philanthropy lift and about a 3.5-year construction project. We have 3 different phases to our construction. The first one's already fully funded, so we're not having to, it's our intent to do our campaign exclusively through philanthropy and not have to raise tuition or rate our endowment. But, just because, as I mentioned, a 5-year campaign, pledges, again, we're lucky that so many people have front loaded and paid it all, but that's a reality that some people have said. It's amazing to us, and this is worth noting, how many of our I don't have the number memorized, but a significant number of our donors have said, I can do this now, but because of that forecast, Liz, of what you just painted, said, you know what, come back to me again in 3 years and I'll maybe able to do some more. And so we've taken that approach with a lot of our donors as well, as especially when they've even sort of tipped their hat or opened the door that they might be amenable to that sort of conversation down the road. But it's definitely something that's going to have to be managed as that environment unfolds.
But you're not pausing, right? You're courage, plot ahead, right? You're going to keep going.
No, and again, if we have to take a line of credit, again, we can do that, but we're well on our way, given that we're only a few months, literally 2.5 months into the public phase, and that we're just under 106 towards a 125 working goal. We're feeling pretty good, but it's definitely something that does keep me up at night, Liz, for sure.
So, question for both of you, the yield rate of 72, I think actually last time I was on campus a couple of weeks ago, 73% was the yield rate for that top echelon. To what do you attribute that? I mean, I have my answer, but I want to hear your answer. Why are you doing so well?
Let me start, and then Tom, if you don't mind, follow up and probably better my answer for sure. But I want to share an anecdote of why I think that, because I'm not up here tipping my cap or taking a bow. I don't, this success, this is a very special place. But I would answer with this. We have a campaign chair. There was a small donor event in my home, and he gave some remarks. And he spoke, and he's very passionate. He makes me look lethargic, which isn't easy to do. And he ended by saying, everyone has their Kincaid story. And he just said it really quickly. And it was amazing how many people went up to me that night, multiple of them, like it with tears in their eyes. And then how much that quote was quoted back to me from this person throughout the months ahead was, everybody does have their Kincaid story, some way that this community has deeply impacted them, their family, their son, their daughter, somebody. And for me, that is the success. I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of wonderful faculty, staff, trustees, and family members and alumni that have had their lives deeply impacted. I'm hearing those words come out, and they sound trite and simple, but that, in my opinion, is the reason we're being so successful, is people love this place and they know it's time for these upgrades.
Tom, what would you add?
And add to that as well. So I think what's critical to try to achieve a high success rate on the yield that you talked about is, number one, you got to try to figure out who the right person is to be in the room when the ask is made, and when is the right time to do that. And then you also have to plan in advance to really review data that you've got, about their giving history, how their kids are doing at school, who else, what potential area in the campaign will appeal to them, and listen. So when you go into the room, you do a lot of listening. And so we've been fortunate. I mean, I think a couple of times you might say we probably could have gone a little higher with the ask. I think that's probably legitimate, but I think that most of the times we've been pretty good. I mean, to get that kind of a yield. And, sometimes you just got to get out there and do it. You got, as Jonathan said, you've got to make the ask, and go with as much confidence as you have. Make sure you brief your volunteers in advance so they know who's going to make the ask. Usually it's Jonathan when he's in the room. So there's times when I meet with a volunteer, I make sure the volunteer is ready to make the ask. If they're not, I'll chip in, but pretty much they're ready to do it. They're well trained and ready to go.
Yes. So a couple of questions in the question box have related to the materials that you are using and how you're talking about the campaign. I will note we had not a hiccup, but another challenge, right? Your building committee chair wanted to put shovels in the ground this past September, was it October? When we were only a year through the silent phase. So we went public without being public, right? We went public because parents were going to drive on campus every day and see bulldozers, yet we weren't really at the public phase of the campaign. Oh, Tom's putting on the hard hat.
Ready to go.
Awesome. So we pivoted. We thought, what are we going to do? And you all launched a website that is an educational tool about the campaign. So Tom, talk a little bit about how that. I'll drop the address for that in the chat box while you answer. How did that website come to be? Who did it? Was it outsourced? Was it in-house, etc.?
So in early spring, we started work on the website, knowing that probably by the fall of this past year, we would have to, we'd need to be ready to go. We got a couple of bids. We found a very good local firm here that understood Kincaid and understood what we were trying to achieve. And we work with them on materials. We work with the building committee on materials, pardon me, on materials for the building component. And then we knew that we needed to have some supporting messages to go on the website, some testimonials from the key people that we put on there. And so we worked through, pardon me, we worked through that website in good shape, all the material, and we didn't promote that until we went live with the building when we first did the construction, pardon me. And the outside firm was very thoughtful. They came on campus. They did a lot of filming here. They did a lot of interviewing with different faculty, different volunteers, different students, and came up with some really good messaging about All In, which is the theme that we have. And it took us about 2 months to decide on the theme. We went through a lot of different things. We just kind of felt, because it was a comprehensive campaign, and as Jonathan said, it's the time to go all in. So it works out perfectly as a messaging thing.
It sure does. And the website link has now been shared in the chat for anyone who wants to check it out. I'll also say that you do not have extraordinary printed materials yet. You're really doing this, the major asks with a pretty, it's still, I believe, a draft, quote unquote, case for support, because you're still soliciting 7 and 6-figure gifts. And we want those donors to know that their opinion matters, and that the rationale may be impacted by their opinions. Okay, one more question, let's say. Tom, how do you hold your fundraisers accountable for fundraising targets?
That's a very good question. So we are using some metrics. We are monitoring the number of prospects that each development officer has. We are asking them to thoroughly review their portfolio, because a lot of them right now we have too many prospects in the portfolio. So we're asking them to move some of those to what we call the farm team, those that we'll talk to later on. And we're taking a look at the ask amount, the amount that comes in, the activities they have, to make sure that they are making calls. We are using our database is helping us a great deal, because there's a way to track actions in it, like whether they're moves, whatever you want to call them. And we're really starting to look at those every week. We sit down and go over things, and we look at the prospects that we've already approached, that we haven't heard back from, those that we are getting ready to approach. And our advancement service manager helps us monitor that together as a group. And, there's times where I might have someone that I'm having trouble getting a hold of, and somebody else may have said, oh, I just saw them at the play last week, I'll call them, or vice versa. So we're trying to use all of our team to make this be efficient. And, I will say the metric thing is evolving, and GG&A is helping us with that. And we are going to set goals starting for February 15th through June 15th now that are going to be they're more metric based than they have been in the past, because now it's time to do that.
I will say, though, working with Kincaid closely, that you create a team culture in your advancement program and among your staff that I think, everybody on your team wants to do the right thing, wants to do their best for Kincaid. And I think that that's essential to not needing the big brother sitting on the desk of everybody, making sure they're making their calls. They want to make their calls. They're part of something really successful and really exciting for Kincaid. So unfortunately, we are really now out of time. So we need to wrap up our discussion. Jonathan and Tom, thank you for your wonderful insights and wisdom. Attendees, I hope you enjoyed our discussion and have some good takeaways. If you would like to revisit this webinar, know that a recording will be posted in the next day or two on our website, grensglier.com. From our homepage, just click on Thought Leadership and then Past Webinars. I also encourage you to follow GG&A, Grenzebach, Glier & Associates, on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with Tom, Jonathan, where we share past and upcoming webinars at the GG&A part and announcements about our upcoming work. Also, for those who are independent school professionals, I hope to see you at the CASE NAIS conference next week in New York. Both Jonathan and Tom are going to be there as well. I think it's testament to your involvement in fundraising, Jonathan, that as a head of school, you're going to that conference. Just more ABCs of Jonathan Eads, and that's part of what makes you successful. Thank you again, Tom and Jonathan. I know our attendees thank you as well. And everyone else, I'm glad you were here. Best wishes for a great rest of the week and a very successful FY23. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.